Welcome to our Saturday simulcast, and brought to you by the Purdue Union Club Hotel, a place that our guest here, John Volk and Chris Pate, have at least seen the renovation. Great spot. They're doing great work there, and we appreciate them. Today is a bittersweet and rendition of Saturday simulcast, certainly, as the passing of Mike McClure. Not only a longtime poster on GoldandBlack.com as DeStewart, but also really an iconic sports figure that a lot of people didn't know a lot about. We're going to celebrate his life. And then, of course, Tom Dienhart will join us in our second segment, and we'll talk a little bit about the current status of Purdue recruiting and football, something that Chris and John are well interested in as well. I want to introduce our panel, so to speak. John Volk, friend of ours, poster on GoldandBlack.com, former Purdue football player living up in the Traverse City, Glen Arbor area, and a friend of Mike McClure's. And of course, we'll bring that into relevance here in a second. Of course, Chris Pate, the not only a 1999 Purdue Double E grad, is that correct?
Double E, correct, yes.
Of course, John also a Purdue grad too. But also the foremost collector of Purdue sports memorabilia in the world. And of course, he and Orlando Items maybe carried that together. Now that Orlando's kind of passed the torch, Chris is the guy. I encourage you. Great story on Chris also, I believe in February, and on the Purdue site that you can leave written stories about him too, to get you up to speed in them. Of course, want to talk about Mike McClure and kind of reintroduce that Mike DeStewart on our message boards. We're outing him now, but passed away this week, Wednesday evening. A longtime Purdue sports fan, did not go to Purdue, but a died in the wool Purdue guy, but also had a great professional career in sports with the White Sox, the Bulls, the Big Ten, the Houston Oilers, Tennessee Oilers, and I'm probably forgetting somebody in there. But
White Sox.
What's that?
White Sox.
And the White Sox. Of course, he started all at WLFI Channel 18 for 1 year as well. So quite the career, and really a presence certainly in our world on GoldandBlack.com. John, I'm going to start with you just on from what your memories. You had frequent conversations, probably many of them digitally, but certainly an opportunity to know what your recollections, not only of what Mike McClure, aka DeStewart, meant to the GoldandBlack.com community, but just his view on sports.
Well, I think Mike was legendary, of course, in his knowledge of sports, and you find out early on that. You might remember something, but Mike always remembered it better. And you could recite something, and he would chain link about 15 other facts to that you didn't know. And I was always impressed with that. If they ever had a Purdue sports trivia contest, he'd win it hands down. And the thing that I liked about Mike was that he was never mean about it, or he would maybe correct you or whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
But it was never. And sometimes those conversations would get a little off track. Let's just put it that way. Some name calling in some cases, and then it'd cool down. And those things, by force of nature, have to be self-monitored, and so forth. But you didn't worry about that with Mike, and it didn't matter the subject. He certainly knew about the high school football and where we grew up in western Chicago in the DuPage County. And I learned later on that he lived there, and that he had worked for the White Sox and the Bulls and so forth. So we had a number of conversations about that. And he was just a great guy from that. And although it's one of those things, somebody was talking last night about his trip down to Atlanta with Mike, and others had hoped to have done that, and it didn't work out. And I had hoped to have had lunch sometime with Mike, because I'm sure I would have learned a ton more. I mean, it's just one of those things. And now I'm ruing the fact that that never happened. But I do treasure the interactions that we had on Gold and Black together.
Yeah, you quoted off air the Joni Mitchell song. You don't know what you've got until it's gone, and Mike was certainly that way. Chris, did have chances to be in his presence, and over the years, again, that love of detail, like in your world too, memorabilia is detail. It is the nuance of not only the things you collect with Purdue, but in sports. But talk about that and that relationship as that developed over the years.
Yeah, it's I had the good fortune and good pleasure of spending a good deal of time with Mike over the years, both at his house and at various sporting events, typically Purdue events, or the occasional lunch at Applebee's there in West Lafayette, or
Yeah.
several other places. Met at Bruno's and all the usual stops. And John alluded to this, but Mike had an elegance about his delivery
Yeah.
in a lot of his stories, and I caught on to that years ago in the early 2000s when I first got to know him, and I said, "My goodness, this guy is just an encyclopedia of knowledge, and he's a living Rolodex of athletic influencers and athletes and administrators." And so I got to get to know this guy. So it turns out we had a collecting passion that we both shared, and that brought us a relatively close friendship over the years, despite being distance keeping us from being very close in proximity. But it was one of those things where every time I was with Mike, I learned something. I learned something about him, and I learned something typically about Purdue. And he was just an information overload type person. And kind of as John put it, he was strong in his opinions and his beliefs, but he always had a reason for those, and he was able to back up his talk.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about him, and I'll even plug one of our sponsors, Triple X, because we had many visits at the Triple X, and really Route 66 before they closed that restaurant, but part of the Triple X family. That tradition was so important to him. And yet, I do think it was a better listener than you would think for a guy that had a lot of knowledge. He would take into, we had a lot of conversations about the future of college sports, where it's all going. Like I said, we were supposed to have a lunch this summer, and I'm sure we would have talked about the House v. NCAA deal till we ended up spending 2 to 3 hours trying to figure out where all this was headed. And even at Mike's experience, he'd have an opinion of how to make this all work. And I think that was the interesting part with him, is he was a solution guy. This is some ways to figure this out, and the ways to do it. But he started going. He talks about going. One thing that was also helpful for me is that in my world of Purdue sports knowledge, I kind of started watching as I said, my start 1966, but he was an expert on the 50s and why things happened at Purdue. And it's interesting because it ties into kind of sometimes the way things happen now. And that was a very, very important thing from that standpoint. John, when you look at his, and like you said, he in our world, in the Knucklehead Central of GoldandBlack.com, it's varying. There's ages. I think there are probably ages. There are mental ages 3 to 100. But I think physical ages, chronological ages of guys at all levels of that. And yet I was been surprised or happy to see the respect that it's gotten and carries just in the last couple of days, reliving those memories and trying to maybe also recreate some of his classic posts over the years.
Yeah, that being an old guy with the social behavior sometimes of a 3-year-old,
Yeah.
I appreciated that. And maybe there's hope for the world yet, I guess, but I won't be around to see it. There was a funny episode. I'm digressing here. An English program called Mrs. Brown's Boys, and Grandpa wants to have a wake while he's still living, and
Yeah.
so he can hear what everybody's going to say about him. Tremendously funny show. But anyway. Yeah, Mike kind of represented a confluence of sorts of, if you will, the old guard and the new guard. Sports is changing so much, and we're all having to adjust to that. And I think in the younger group, we still see ourselves in that, the avid sports fan, and we don't realize in some ways how much it's changed, especially for the newer guys. Um, and it's hard for us older guys to adapt to that. We see so much money being thrown around, and it's not the concepts of the money, but we used to think of it as an amateur sport, and it's hard to wrap our hands and our minds around that. And I think Mike, because of his experience in the professional world, was probably better equipped than most of us old folk in dealing with that. I had my own thoughts on that, as everybody knows. That doesn't mean I was particularly happy to see it going that way. But I do wonder what the future holds for college football. And it would have been nice to have had Mike around to have had his opinions expressed. And I'm sure he would have. So.
That we would have known he would have chosen his spots to bring that. But Chris, when you talk about the items, we talk about the history of Purdue sports, and you're the guy that's going to carry that forward, I think, as much in terms of the things that are important for Purdue's rich history. It got brought to and I'm glad that Mike lived to see it this year in the Final Four, another great chapter that will forever be a part of the rich tradition of Purdue sports. But talk about that and his love for that, and just from the memorabilia, some of the things that he might have had that you thought were of tremendous value, his knowledge of how he helped you maybe do what you do in the Purdue sports and memorabilia business.
Yeah, Alan, I remember years ago there was an auction that came up for a ticket to the 1924 Indiana Purdue football game. That would be the dedication game for Ross-Ade Stadium. And at the end of the auction, turned out Mike won it, and I was the underbidder. And he messaged me after the auction and said, I think he was kind of surprised at the amount of money that the ticket brought. And so he messaged me, and I remember one of his quotes were "See you along the trail," but he said something about, "Well, you must know what that ticket was and how significant it was," and so that kind of got us started actually with our relationship. And funny that several years later, Mike was downsizing some of his memorabilia, and I ended up buying that ticket back from him. So I do have it back in my collection. One of my favorite pieces, being from the dedication of Ross-Ade. Mike had all kinds of autographs, of course, with his access to all sorts of athletes from, like you said, Alan, from the '60s, '70s, and there on. He had tons of autographed baseballs from just all kinds of Hall of Famers and you name it, tons of books and other media guides and paper memorabilia that's very fun to look through. I had a good time seeing that. I helped him sell some of it in the past, and was able to acquire a lot of the Purdue stuff that, as you mentioned, we look forward to carrying on at Purdue. And that's something that we're in the process of trying to make something happen as far as at least a significant display. And at some point, maybe we can move that to kind of, like John said, a Hall of Fame type facility. That's if there's a crusade that I have in my life, that would probably be it. I think that we've got some stuff that as much as I love having and showing off in my house, they really need to be on display at Purdue, and we need to get a facility there to make that happen. So that's something we're all working.
Yeah, I think it is, and yourself and Tom Schott doing a lot of the work with those memorabilia shows are just very, very important. And as we all talked about, they're going to want it sometime, and Purdue fans it's going to have great value. When Ross-Ade is an old man, you're going to want to have some kind of special thing that he signed or something special that he did during his magnificent time here in West Lafayette. John, when you go back and look at what Mike brought, because he really Purdue had such a rich tradition, obviously, in recruiting and getting football players from Chicago, but just that story of what, and there's been a hue and cry among Purdue sports fans to, well, why, can Purdue get back in that Chicago market? I mean, obviously football recruiting's changed dramatically and the world's changed, but that great history of some of the great players that came through there, John Volk included, but the guys that
I'm like a
made,
cockroach. I just showed up.
yeah, there you go. But that opportunity that was a big part. And even some of his stories of the godfathers of Purdue sports, long before NIL was allowed, there
Yeah.
was probably a little NIL going on. Purdue was pretty straight, but the guys that made a difference in Chicago that were big parts of Purdue sports over the years, and some of the ones that were behind the scenes were great stories that Mike shared. But John, you look at that and that Chicago bet, because Mike had such a career in Chicago, was a big part of Purdue sports.
Yeah, the names that I think of going back to Tim Foley, of course Darryl Stingley and Otis Armstrong, Dave Butts. These are guys from my era. Ron Meyer was I guess a big recruiter up here. Of course, I was not born, but raised in Overland Park, Kansas. Right. So we didn't see much of Purdue out there, but at the time, I can remember in the high school library flipping through some stuff, and there was now the name is escaping me. The trainer, Pinky
Newell.
Pinky Newell, and his workouts and stuff, and that made an impression on me. And of course, football games weren't widely televised back then in the late '60s, and with Phipps and Greasy, that usually meant Purdue had a shot at being on television, and there was broadcaster Chris Schenkel there doing the game from Ross-Ade, and some of the students hung a big bed sheet out of Cary saying Chris Schenkel lived here.
Yeah.
And I looked at the outsides and I said, well, if I end up going to school there, I don't think I want to live in Cary. That looks pretty old, decrepit. And of course, that's where I got assigned when I got to campus. But yeah, there are all those kinds of influences. And one thing I wanted to point out about Mike, we used to razz Notre Dame and all of their Subway alumni, and Mike was a Subway alum himself. And I think maybe we should give a little bit more credit to Subway alumni, because there probably wasn't a bigger booster of Purdue than Mike.
Yeah,
and that
DePauw
doesn't
64, right? So 1964 grad of DePauw, but boy, Purdue, and I think, and this is the thing. Also, we all talked about the Final Four this year and why it was so emotional. Such a family thing. I mean, it was a generational thing. You wanted your kids and your grandkids, if that was to have that experience. Well, Mike had that growing up. I mean, this was a big personal thing with his family growing up and getting taken to Purdue games back in the day. He was born in 1942. I think he said his first game 49. I want to say maybe 50, but those were yes, there were some great Purdue wins over Notre Dame in those days, and that's how Purdue football in a lot of ways really got on the national map. But he was there and had that experience, but it was more than Purdue. It was the deal with I believe with his father and his family that really became a big deal. Chris, we're going to let you give you the final word here on wrapping up as you look at this. Obviously, a sad day, but a passing of a guy that really behind the scenes kind of embodied what Purdue was all about. Purdue fandom was all about. But put that into words as we close here for our segment.
Sure, I'll do my best, Alan. That's a challenge to put someone like Mike into the context that he deserves. But Mike was loyal. He was had an incredible memory and incredible attention to detail, and that's something that I know I would like to be as eloquent as he was in many of those ways. Mike was someone who, through the good or the bad, he was there for Purdue. He was rooting for Purdue. He was, distraught at the losses like we all were, and enjoyed the highs of some of the many wonderful victories that Purdue's enjoyed over the years. And while the circumstances of getting together with the two of you are not fun, it's I can't help but smile when I think of Mike and think about all of the wonderful things that he got to experience via his Purdue fandom, and the travels that his life took him. And then I'm thankful that he was able to share so many of those stories and experiences with so many of you on GoldandBlack.com and on Knucklehead Central, and to be able to let some of us live vicariously through him and those experiences, because it's obviously something that creates a significant interest. So certainly think about that when I think about Mike. And it gives me a second to pause and say, like you did, Alan, I'm glad that Mike got to see Purdue play in the Final Four. And I know I've said to a lot of people over the last few years that, hey, guys, this is a pretty special time that we've had with Purdue athletics, with Zach-Ade and all that Coach Painter and the team have done on the basketball court. And we've had some good success in the football field as well, with the Big Ten West Championship and some really memorable bowl game victories. And I just encourage everyone out there that listens to this to savor those, think about those. And, if you're just driving to work or going around town, think back about some of those real fun memories and smile and enjoy that moment, and the fact that you got to experience it, because that's what makes life living for sports fans like all of us.
All right. Well
Well
said.
said, Chris.
Yeah, well said. I think it's true, and that's maybe Mike's legacy is, he enjoyed, he experienced all the bumps, but realized this was an event and a pastime of sorts that is important to a lot of people. All right, guys, thanks so much for your time. We'll make this, and again, we're going to keep tooting this horn on the memorabilia side and the importance of Purdue's past. And two better guys to do that with than these two. We enjoy that. That doesn't mean you're old, John. Don't take it personally. So you're good, but we always love to relive the past and try not to reformulate it too much, but it's a lot of fun to do that. All right, guys.
My heroes are dying between.
Yeah, that's the hard thing.
Yeah.
That's the hard thing now. But all right, we'll be back here. I don't know, in our simulcast, we kind of go from one transition to the next. We'll have Tom Dienhart on here in a second here to talk a little bit about this June recruiting time, and obviously Purdue summer camps as well. Ryan Walters and company doing that. So stay tuned. We'll be transitioning to that. Guys, thanks again.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Tom Dienhart joins me, and we will talk a little Purdue football recruiting. A busy month in June for the Boilermakers and Ryan Walters as they get ready for the future, which is obviously a lot of the camps and stuff, but obviously too a lot of players back on campus. Tom, welcome as always. I first want to ask you about the first segment we had, of course. Chris Payton and John Volk to talk about Mike McClure and his posting not only on GoldandBlack.com, but some of the relationship you had. I mean, you said you met up with him and heard from him from time to time. Just talk about that and what he meant from your perspective, his detail, his sporting life that you and I have both enjoyed a life in sports. He did as well. Quite the life that he lived.
Yeah, Alan, before I obviously even joined you at this fine institution that was GoldandBlack.com.
Yeah.
I was a message board reader, and I was always intrigued by his post. Who is this DeStewart guy? The detail and the history with which you could recount of Purdue. Always, because as you know, I mean, we're kind of birds of the same feather. We love Purdue. We love Purdue history. And I'm always peppering you with questions, Alan, about just weird stuff, like where did Hank Stram live when he coached at Purdue? I mean, I had you drive me by Jack Mollenkoff's house.
Yeah.
That type of stuff.
Woodland Avenue, yep.
I'm always fascinated by. So, yeah, he was that kind of a guy. So the stories he would tell and about he was involved with what TV 18 when at its infancy. Of course, the Houston Oilers, and that story you posted on the board, I went through it. My gosh, he was sort of like I mean, he was the conduit, the guy who really laid a lot of the groundwork for the Oilers' move from Houston to Nashville. And I think he worked with the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, White
I
Sox.
know, and the stories he would tell about guys, and just a passionate Purdue fan too. Alan had an opinion, didn't he?
Hell yeah.
And as people can see watching this, if you're on our message boards, the response that news of his death, what that evoked from people and the memories that have been shared on that message board thread should tell you a lot as well. So, Alan, a life well lived. Seemed like he was a loved guy. He loved his family. He's talked about his family, his grandchildren, and yeah, just an all around good person and a guy who was sort of fun to celebrate his life and what he meant to a lot of people.
Yeah, as you said, I think off air that you always learn something, and he was factually correct. I mean, he knew his stuff and didn't necessarily speak about. He had an opinion, but he would bring a lot of things to light that were interesting, to say the least. Also, what's interesting, obviously, is the month of June in Purdue football. I think Purdue had a commitment this week. There's more to come probably, but also camps. Kind of give us a bird's eye view of what's been going on from your perspective with Ryan Walters and company. Again, this historically is a busy time because of in recruiting and visits, etc.
Where to begin, Alan?
Yeah.
June is that month where all these camps are taking place. It's like a turnstile here in West Lafayette, my friend. They've had 4 camps, I think, thus far. Specialist camp, 2 prospect camps, and a team camp. There's one left, Alan, and it's going to be this Wednesday, the one last prospects camp, and I'm told this will be their biggest camp yet. It's upwards of 200 people, and supposed to have their best collection of talent too, Alan. Higher caliber of players going to be at this last camp. So, and yeah, you're right. They got a commitment this last week. Brian Kordovich, a big tight end, 6'4", 225 kid from the Cleveland, Ohio area. And yeah, kind of a wide receiver in high school, was bulking up, Alan. Those Purdue tight ends sort of have that same build, more receiver than inline, big, bulky, blocking tight end, sort of like a Travis Kelce kind of a build, And that's this guy. That tight end room is very intriguing, man. I tell you what, you add him, to the kid they brought in last year, Tavion Galloway, and of course Max Clare, George Byrne, and then Drew Bibber. There's a lot of interesting players in that room. So Justin Sins, the tight end coach, has a lot to work with. So 7 commitments so far in the class of 2025. Probably not going to be a real big class, maybe 14 to 18 guys. 8 official visits this weekend. This is the 3rd weekend of OVs. Not sure if we're getting any commitments this weekend or not, but 8 guys are coming in. And yeah, then of course the official visits will continue throughout June. Maybe by the time we get to July 4th, Alan, maybe there's 10 or 11 commitments. We'll see, but a lot of moving parts as they try to put together this 2025 recruiting class.
You get the sense with Ryan Walters and staff that there's enthusiasm, even in this crazy world of everything going 19 different directions, and where we're all going to land, nobody knows for sure. But they seem to, at least on the outside, keep that enthusiasm, which is, I think, what you have to have. You got to embrace the change. You've talked about that many times. You best dance with what you got to dance with. Talk about that and just the general tenor around there. You're around that staff a lot this time of year, just with the camps, but just that somewhat youthful zeal. Not all of them are as young as Ryan Walters, but a lot of them are. But what that has meant in the marketplace in terms of how Purdue's gone after kids.
Yeah, good guys, and that's one of the things maybe I like as much as anything at those camps is getting a chance to visit with the staffers. Grant O'Brien's one of those young guys you're talking about, Alan, the safeties coach. Fun guy. Sam Carter, the cornerbacks coach. Great energy. Just a fun guy to be around. I got, Brick Haley and Marcus Johnson and, of course, Kevin Kane. And I got to go on and on. Lamar Kennard, the one Boilermaker on the staff. It's kind of fun to commiserate with him and share memories. And he goes back to being a Coletto recruit. He was a walk-on. Of course, was on those fun early Joe Taylor teams. But anyway, good guys, and yeah, a lot of youthful energy. It does tend to tilt on the young side. But yeah, that's one of the appeals, I think. I talk to some of these kids who visit, and they always like the vibe, Alan.
Yeah.
We're too old to detect the vibe, maybe.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, they again, I think you need that energy, you need that juice. It's hard to recruit, Alan. It's relentless. You have to recruit every day.
Yeah.
It's like eating. I mean, you got to do something every day in recruiting. I don't know, whatever it is, visit somebody, make a call, make a text, whatever you're allowed to do at whatever point of the year, you got to do your recruiting every day, and that can wear you down. It's sort of a young man's game at some point. So, and Ryan Walters, I think that's some of his appeal. He's a young guy, Alan, and he's got a lot of that energy, and he's not beaten down. He's
Yeah.
Everything is still possible, and that's great. And it is still possible, right? And you're not going to tell him otherwise. And Purdue needs that juice, and he seems to connect with these guys. And yeah, it's going to be fun to see how this continues to evolve. I don't think they're going to lean on the portal like they have the first 18 months. Obviously, they had a lot of, I guess, I'm not going to call it dead weight, but players he didn't think maybe fit his scheme.
Right.
And so he had to really bring in some players. He needs some instant help. And that's what the portal provides. I think you're going to see him shift, try to make this more of a high school centric program, kind of like Matt Painter, still supplemented with the portal, of course. So, yeah, then we know the challenges, Alan. There's an 18-team Big Ten now. That schedule, we've talked about that schedule before. They're probably getting sick of us talking about it and casting doubt on them. But man, Notre Dame, Oregon, Penn State's coming here too. They got to go to Wisconsin, Alan. I couldn't tell you the last time they went to Wisconsin, 2003.
Right.
They have to go to Ohio State. So yeah, it's the challenges are there, and the trip to Oregon State's going to be intriguing too, Alan. But I'm really eager to see where they can take this thing in the next couple of years.
Yeah, going to be really an interesting year, as we've talked about, just because that influx of talent and speed from the portal, some youthful insurgents as well. Those are things that we'll see what it translates to on the field, and that I think is going to be the great storyline. Jordan Jones wrote a good story on Friday, talking about the Indianapolis and the state of Indiana, or mostly Indianapolis recruiting, just as your coverage, and certainly working with recruiting and the state of Indiana. Of course, you were a state of Indiana football player as well. It's changed since the mid '80s, but it's gotten better. And Indianapolis is a place that has got a wealth of talent. But just in your travels, how do you view that?
Yeah, good story by Jordan Jones, a good guy. And he talked to Lance Scheib. We know Lance Scheib, right? I'm sure some people watching this remember Lance Scheib. Sometimes I assume everybody knows who he is, Alan, but they may not. Of course, he was a teammate of Jeff George's at Warren Central, came to Purdue in the fall of '85, a year ahead of Jeff George. And George left Lance State and had kind of a nice career, caught a lot of touchdown passes.
I think, what was it? 14 receptions, career receptions, like 9 for touchdown. Not right, but it's close. But go ahead.
Yeah, something like that. But Lance, over the years since then, Alan, since those ancient days, he forged a career as a very successful high school coach, and remains a very influential figure throughout the state. Very well connected, does some radio work too. So yeah, he talked to Lance, was a good sounding board in that story, and of course he talked to Jason Simmons, another longtime Indiana high school guy who's now on the Purdue staff as an offensive analyst. Great guy, Alan, and I think they talked about sort of the evolution of football in the state. We all know basketball in Indiana and the marriage there and the association there, and that's obviously very real. We all get that. But high school football and youth football has gotten better. And of course, the one moment that's really led to the ascent, I think, of the improvement of high school football is the arrival of Peyton Manning, right? Yeah. And then they talk about that extensively in the story. Of course, the number 1 overall pick in the 1998 draft out of Tennessee. And you all know what Peyton Manning meant to the Colts, to the state, to pro football at large. You can't quantify it in words. So kids pick up on that. They want to play football, and that was a very successful run they had. And I think that was a big part of it, right? And I think there's always been a decent amount of talent in Indiana. You were at the NFF banquet on Sunday, right? Some nice football players there around. The one guy Doug Downing was a guy I grew up with. I played football with Doug as a kid through ninth grade, and my God, what a great football player he was. And Clayton Richards, of course, a little bit later. Maybe Allen. Maybe he's the best high school football player ever from Tippecanoe County. George Karloftis was very good too. But anyway, Clayton Richards, awesome guy, and Dan Brandenburg from Rensselaer got picked by the Bills. So yeah, there's always good players, but again, I think it has improved. A lot of it, like they say in that story, is because of the arrival of Peyton Manning way back, 26 or 27 years ago. My gosh.
Yeah, I think it was absolutely a turning point, and yeah, it was fun. Even last Sunday at the NFF to have Clayton Richard. You forget that they forget that he was a 4-star-esque high school quarterback that went to Michigan. That's a good debate. That would be a good debate. I suppose you could say he's the best offensive player to come from the state of
I tell you, Al, Doug Downing, man. Doug Downing
for a lot of touchdowns, and he was as they said at that time, a parade All-American. So
he could have gone anywhere. He could have gone anywhere too. It's so funny. I've thought about his career, and he came in the fall of '83 and redshirted. Scott Campbell was the quarterback. So then going in the fall of '84, he's going to battle for the job, and he's going to battle Jeff Huber and some guy named Jim Everett.
Yep.
Of course, Jim Everett wins the job and is quarterback for 2 years. So you get the fall of '86, Doug Downing is set to start right at quarterback. Here comes Jeff George. He lost out.
Number one player in the country.
And Jeff George. Jim Everett was the number 3 pick in the '86 draft. And of course, Jeff George was the number 1 pick in the 1990 draft. So he sort of got caught in a tough spot there. He did get to quarterback or start a few games in '87. Remember Sean McCarthy, the punter? And Doug Downing sort of split time that year. But yeah, Doug's a good guy. Was a great all-around athlete too. But yeah, you go back and look at the clips. We lived it. We lived that. Him and Tom Kriebel and those Jeff teams.
Naughty Weaver, right?
Naughty Weaver, what a running back. Tom Kriebel. Yeah. People forget how great Tom Kriebel was. But yeah, just the Doug Downing was a trip. Just a trip. The whole Downing family, right?
Yeah. Yeah, very emotional thing. Actually, at the banquet, his dad, Bob Downing, who was a longtime Jeff coach, introduced him and kind of to the Hall of Fame, and that was there were some tears shed between both of those guys as you could tell that family connection extremely strong. And in Tippecanoe County, those guys meant a lot to really what football in this area means. The Downings are royalty when it comes to that.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. All right, to get me as we come to a close here, we've got 16 days, or 15 days as this airs, and the rest of June. You talk about some additional prospects coming in camp. What else? What other things are you working on as you inch your way towards 2024 season?
Yeah, continuing to cover these camps and the OVs. Alan, eight guys are coming in here this weekend. They will start arriving on Friday, obviously. A couple of interesting receivers from Indiana, John Anthony Hall and LeBron Hill. And their quarterback's coming in, Alan. He's already committed, Sawyer Anderson. So your 2025 quarterback is taking his OB this weekend. A shorter guy from the Lone Star State. So yeah, he'll be up here. And Jaden Woods, Alan, he's a very interesting guy. He's an edge. He's from the Kansas City, Missouri area. He's got a lot of big offers, Alan. He's one of the top players still on Purdue's board. Jaden Woods, edge guy, has been to Penn State, been to Wisconsin, is going to go to Tennessee. He's going to be here. And, probably the top guy on their board is another edge too, Alan, Marion Dye. Marion Dye was here the very first weekend of OVs, May 31st to June 2nd. Kid from Elkhart, Alan, just a who's who of offers. And Purdue's really selling, staying home. They're really selling their scheme. And word is around his family, they would like for him to stay close to home. Now, Ohio State may be the favorite there, Alan, but give Joe Deneen credit, the Purdue Rush-Ins coach. he's done a good job keeping Purdue very involved and giving them a legit shot to get, Marion Dye and this Jaden Woods kid who was here this weekend too. So yeah, I'd be interested to see how these guys, recruitment continues to evolve with the Boilermakers.
Yeah, going to be a storyline that it never goes away, like you said. Recruiting doesn't, and nobody does it better than Tom Dienhart and covering not only Purdue recruiting but Purdue football. We thank you for that. All right, at the end of another Saturday simulcast, I want to thank the Union Club Hotel. Signed on with us for another year. We're excited about that. The 811 Bistro, great spot for, and you can go to the Boiler Up Bar and sit outside in a beautiful West Lafayette summer afternoon and enjoy a iced tea out there if you like. Great spot though, and they've done a great job there. And a spa opening. Tom, are you going to start getting massages there? Starting, I think Vicky told me on July 14th or 20, maybe it was July 24th. There's
Wow.
being up on the second level of the Union. You can spend a whole weekend there and enjoy that.
Get yourself pampered, Alan. Take that should be for your wifey there.
Oh, I think so. I think I better be thinking that. And you know what? Also, Travel and Leisure. They were the only hotel and motel in the state of Indiana listed in the top 500. They made the list. They're very proud of that. That's quite an accomplishment. So Purdue's got a plum in the Union. It always has been, dating back to the days, but it's new and different and exciting. And Tom and I like to walk through there and just reminisce.
Yeah, I do. I miss the ride board. I miss the old arcade. I miss the sweet shop.
Yeah, it's a new spot. All right, have a great rest of your weekend, Tom. Thank you all for watching and listening. Thanks to certainly Chris Payton, John Volk, also for reminiscing and reliving the life of Mike McClure, as Tom Dienhart did as well. It's a bittersweet time for the McClure family, certainly, but we appreciate all that Mike has meant to us at Gold and Black over the years. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week on our Saturday simulcast.